We'll start today with the leader of the official opposition. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is officially back in the House of Commons. He got his own seat again and a fresh opportunity to take on Prime Minister Mark Carney face to face. Here's part one of our conversation. Hi, Mr. Poilievre.
Good to be here.
It's a pleasure to welcome you to our studio. Thank you so much for making the time.
A privilege.
I do want to start off on the economy and more specifically your view of the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on it. Would you accept a deal that keeps any level of tariffs on sectors like steel, aluminum, and autos?
I would seek a tariff-free deal. I mean, we used to have that privileged access to the American economy, and in exchange for that, we could provide more continental security that would make both our countries more secure and stable. That's the deal that I would go for. And I think that the key back home, though, is to become more self-reliant, strong, and stand on our own 2 feet so that we have the leverage to negotiate. And right now, Mark Carney doesn't have a lot of leverage because liberal policies have made us overly reliant on the Americans. If we were building pipelines and port expansions and moving our resources to the Pacific and the Atlantic, to faraway markets, then we could go to the Americans with the ability to say we have other options. And right now, of course, after 10 years of anti-development liberal policies, we don't have other options. And so Mr. Carney has unfortunately negotiated out of a position of weakness.
I want to follow up a little bit on the development side of things in a moment, but when you say, for example, that we at this moment are overly reliant on the United States, under the government that you were a part of, the cabinet under Prime Minister Harper, at the end of that time in government, we sent about 76% of our exports to the United States, about 1% higher actually than we did last year. How can you say that this, at this moment we're overly reliant, but back then we were not?
Well, because over the last 10 years, the government has blocked all of the major infrastructure that would have allowed us to move tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars of merchandise to Europe and Asia. Our previous government had paved the way for projects like the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which had been approved and would be moving 500,000 barrels of oil per day had the Trudeau Liberals not come in with Mark Carney's support and killed that project. The Energy East pipeline would have been moving 1 million barrels a day to the East Coast, displacing dirty Russian oil and turning dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people. But of course, Trudeau killed that project. And there of course has been the anti-resource law C-69, the tanker ban, the industrial carbon tax, and countless other anti-development policies that have driven about $800 billion of investment out of our country under the Liberals. And unfortunately, that exodus of investment has accelerated under Mark Carney to a point where the National Bank says that the $50 billion that is left in the last 6 months is the worst exodus in any 6-month period in Canadian history.
Do you think it's fair to pin the blame? And I understand contrasting, for example, what's happening versus what they said they would do, but do you think it's fair to pin entirely the blame, for example, for that exodus of investment on this government's actions? We have never faced a U.S. president that has leveled the kinds of economic threats that he has against our country. He has specifically targeted investment as a cause for that, saying, I want investment to come to the United States. That's part of the reason I'm doing this. Like, is it not normal that companies would then follow suit when they're faced with that threat? Is it fair, really, to put all the blame at the government's feet?
You know what I think is fair? Let's hold Mr. Carney to the standard he set for himself. Mr. Carney said he would spend less. His deficit spending is 100% more. He said that he would bring more investment, and we've had a record exodus of investment since he became Prime Minister. And finally, Canadian business leaders through the Business Council have said that Mark Carney's regulations and red tape are actually more damaging to the economy, even more damaging than Donald Trump's policies. And that's why, despite Mr. Carney's promise that he would make us the fastest growing economy in the G7, we're now the fastest shrinking economy. And on one last point, he's in Mexico, or just coming back from Mexico. Great laboratory, right? Because we're both next door to the United States of America. So how have we both done relatively? In the most recent quarter, Mexico's economy grew by an impressive 2.4%, while regrettably ours shrunk by 1.6%. Mexican exports to the U.S. are up while ours have collapsed by 18%. And of course, Canadian unemployment, I regret to say, is 3 times higher than Mexico. So Mexico has the same problem. We both share America as our neighbor and biggest trading partner. So what have the Mexicans done right that Mark Carney's done wrong? Well, it's that Mark Carney said that he would put in dollar-for-dollar tariffs, and now he's basically backed down on everything. What you don't do in a negotiation, what we're finding is that Mr. Carney, it was a real bait and switch for him to say he knew how to negotiate, because we're seeing him in action now. What you never do is threaten something and then withdraw the threat without getting anything in return. And he's backed down on dollar-for-dollar tariffs, on the the digital services tax, on military spending, on all sorts of other things that he promised to Canadians and threatened to President Trump. And as a result, the president smells weakness. Now the Chinese see the same weakness, and they're hitting our farmers and fish harvesters. So we have far higher tariffs from both China and the U.S. today than when Mr. Carney took office, promising that he would end the tariffs.
But what would you like him to do, or what, I should reframe it, if you were Prime Minister, would you do? Because again, Mexico, you've just detailed, has a much better result. What they did was not put any counter tariffs on. They sent 10,000 troops to the border. Obviously, the problems at the border are different. Like, they are viewed as one of the many countries who, in essence, capitulated to the demands of Trump in order to better secure their economy. Even though it's not dollar for dollar, our government has not done that. Are you saying that you would have dollar-for-dollar tariffs? You'd have 50% counter tariffs, for example, on aluminum and steel?
To be clear, Mark Carney has capitulated. He's removed almost all of the counter tariffs. So
no, 25% remains on steel and aluminum.
He has capitulated on almost all of the counter tariffs. He's reversed himself on everything. What would I do? I'd pass the Canadian Sovereignty Act, which would make us more independent by opening our country for business. We would repeal all of the anti-energy laws and anti-resource laws, the Northwest BC coast shipping ban, the industrial carbon tax. I would make it so that capital gains tax is zero when businesses or investors reinvest their capital in Canada, opening mines, factories, pipelines, and other job-creating economic infrastructure that would make us more self-reliant and less dependent on other countries.
The Canadian government under Mark Carney has terminated a significant pipeline project that would have transported Alberta oil to United States markets. Pierre Poilievre responded swiftly with sharp political criticism, turning this into more than just another energy sector disagreement. This situation has become a revealing indicator of Canada's current position, its growing dependence on others, and the implications when the United States continues expanding while Canada's leadership continues obstructing progress and self-reliance. The controversy began when the government decided to halt a proposed pipeline designed to carry Alberta's oil directly into American markets. Project advocates maintained it would have generated tens of thousands of employment opportunities and enhanced trade relationships with the U.S., providing Canada with essential leverage in ongoing tariff disputes. However, the agreement was terminated before any construction commenced. Pierre Poilievre responded forcefully in Parliament and subsequent interviews, delivering a harsh critique. He charged Carney with undermining Canada's energy industry, following what he described as a predictable liberal approach, blocking pipelines, entangling projects in bureaucratic obstacles, and pushing investments toward the United States. This time, however, he connected it to a broader issue regarding Canada's diminishing influence with Washington. Poilievre cautioned that by refusing to develop infrastructure, Canada is not only forfeiting jobs and income, but also negotiating strength in trade conflicts with Donald Trump. According to his assessment, Canada is becoming excessively dependent on the U.S. while observing billions in investment departing the country. Initially, this appeared to be standard partisan conflict, a liberal administration emphasizing climate commitments, while conservatives countered with employment growth arguments. However, Poilievre's argument struck deeper than Carney anticipated, which distinguished this exchange. He presented a case extending beyond a single project, addressing a decade-long pattern of decisions. Northern Gateway, Energy East, Keystone XL, and numerous other projects never materialized due to changing regulations and federal rejections. Each one, Poilievre contended, represented another lost opportunity to diversify markets and strengthen Canada's international position. This seems contradictory, since diversification appears to align with Carney's stated objectives. However, his methods are proving ineffective. Carney maintains that the government's stance aligns aligns with climate targets and long-term objectives. Yet observers found Poilievre's criticism and supporting statistics difficult to dismiss. $800 billion in lost investment, record capital flight in the past 6 months alone, and Canadian companies like Enbridge constructing pipelines in the United States rather than domestically. This exchange revealed more than political maneuvering. It exposed a structural issue. The United States under Trump continues approving new energy infrastructure, constructing LNG terminals, and expanding exports globally. Canada, meanwhile, blocks projects and drives its companies southward. To grasp this moment's significance, historical context helps. A decade ago, under Stephen Harper, several major projects were planned. Northern Gateway was designed to transport oil from Alberta to the Pacific. Energy East would have moved 1 million barrels daily to Atlantic coast refineries and ports. Both were promoted as transformational projects opening new Asian and European markets. Neither survived the Liberal government's arrival. Both projects were cancelled. Legal challenges, regulatory modifications, and political promises combined to halt them. Instead of building new capacity and independence that Carney claims to want, everything stalled. Oil production increased, but pipeline capacity did not. Rail transport partially filled the void, but at higher costs and greater risks. Adding Bill C-69, criticized as the No More Pipelines law, plus a moratorium on oil tankers off British Columbia's coast. The result is an environment where companies no longer believe projects will receive approval, and investment climate has deteriorated. Anyone considering such investments in Canada faces this reality that Poilievre emphasized. It represents not just one cancellation, but an entire system and history of cancellations designed to prevent development. Superficially, the pipeline dispute concerns steel, jobs, and environmental regulations. However, beneath the surface, it concerns leverage and who possesses it. Poilievre argued that Canada has lost its ability to negotiate with Trump from strength. In his perspective, a country that can only send its oil to one market negotiates with significant disadvantage. If Canada had pipelines reaching both coasts with European and Asian access, it could enter Washington discussions saying it has alternatives. Without those projects, the U.S. recognizes Canada's constrained position. Statistics support this narrative. Over 3/4 of Canada's exports still flow to the United States. Canadian energy investment has declined, while American energy exports have surged, and Mexico's economy has outpaced Canada's growth. For Carney government critics, this illustrates a country sliding toward irrelevance. This situation exists within a broader context. Looking southward at the United States under Trump, America has become the world's largest oil and gas producer. Pipelines are constructed, LNG terminals are operational, and exports are climbing. The U.S. transitioned from energy dependence to energy dominance. Examining Mexico, despite sharing the same neighbor and facing similar tariff threats, Mexico's economy has grown faster. Its U.S. exports have increased, while Canada's have decreased. In the most recent quarter, Mexico achieved 2.4% growth, while Canada's economy contracted by 1.6%. Mexican unemployment remains significantly lower than Canada's. Even Europe, struggling following Russia's Ukraine invasion, has managed to construct new LNG import facilities rapidly. How is it that everyone else is succeeding while Canada is not? This appears intentional. Germany, for instance, approved and built a terminal in under a year, something Canadian companies claimed would be impossible under current domestic regulations. Against this background, Canada's paralysis is conspicuous. While others move quickly to secure energy and investment, Canada debates, delays, and obstructs. This is the contrast Poilievre is highlighting, explaining why his criticism resonated. The pipeline conflict represents one flashpoint in a much larger struggle over Canada's economic future. On one side, conservatives advocate returning to resource development, energy independence, and policies that would reduce Canada's reliance on foreign markets. This resembles Trump-style policy, or perhaps just common sense. Carney appears unwilling to emulate Trump and lacks common sense. Liberals under Carney argue that climate goals should be the long-term priority. They seem to want what occurred during COVID's peak when people were concerned about the pandemic and Venice's water appeared cleaner because no human activity was taking place, no life, no joy was happening, with everyone frozen in fear at home. Is this what Carney desires? Clean air while everyone remains home begging for assistance? Both objectives can be achieved simultaneously. One can have good food, employment, employment, and maintain a clean, safe, beautiful environment. Nature is valuable, and a clean environment is important. Both are possible. The liberal position that long-term climate goals are the priority despite causing horrible short-term economic suffering is unreasonable. This divide is not new, but the pipeline shutdown has sharpened it. Carney reinforced the liberal approach through his criticism. Poilievre made clear that conservatives view these stakes as existential. Poilievre even described what he termed a Canadian Sovereignty Act, a package of measures he claimed would open the country to investment, reduce taxes, and eliminate anti-energy legislation. His proposal is straightforward. Make Canada a place where projects can be built and then negotiate with the U.S. from strength. This approach is intelligent, logical, and brilliant. Why doesn't Carney pursue this path? The pipeline clash represents a fundamental disagreement over how Canada defines sovereignty and power in the 21st century. The immediate consequences have been economic and political. In Alberta, another project has been shelved, workers remain waiting, provinces are frustrated, and in Ottawa, political tensions are escalating. Carney now faces criticism not only from conservatives, but from business leaders, premiers, and industry groups. The Business Council of Canada has warned that overregulation and red tape are more harmful than even Trump's tariffs. Investment reports indicate record outflows. For Trump, this situation represents a victory. With Canada sidelined, American producers can increase foreign sales, strengthen their trade negotiation position, achieve near-monopoly status, and attract Canadian companies to build south of the border. Each pipeline Canada blocks, Poilievre argues, effectively represents another Trump victory. The larger question concerns future implications. For Poilievre, the message is clear. Carney's policies are dismantling Canada's economic foundation. For Carney, the counter-message is equally firm. Climate goals and long-term sustainability take precedence, even at the cost of immediate growth and damaged lives. Caught in the middle are Canadian workers, families, ordinary people, business owners, and investors observing Canada and wondering where to go next. If current trends continue, they will likely conclude that America offers stability, while Canada does not. Capital is fleeing the country. Canada risks losing not only more jobs, but also more global influence, of which it already has little. This is Poilievre's central point. In his words, only a reckless government would strangle its own energy sector when the economy is already weakening. The next phase of this conflict will develop across several fronts. In Parliament, Poilievre will continue arguing that Carney's economic vision is destructive and weakening Canada. On the campaign trail, conservatives will frame the election as a choice between growth and decline, between economic life and death, strength and weakness, sovereignty and dependence. Beyond politics, investors will continue voting with their feet. If capital flight continues, pressure on Ottawa will only intensify, and premiers in energy-producing provinces will push harder for federal approval of stalled projects. South of the border, Trump will use Canada's paralysis as evidence of his own decisiveness. The global energy landscape is shifting rapidly. Countries that build will shape the future, while countries that stall risk being left behind and deteriorating. Canada faces the question of whether it wants to be a player or a bystander, whether it wants to influence how the world operates or become a sideline observer with no voice in anything. The current situation presents a pipeline that could have reshaped trade and strengthened Canada's leverage. Now gone. A government doubling down on climate policy faces fresh criticism, while an opposition leader argues that Canada's economic independence is at stake. This represents more than another policy debate. It is a fight over how Canada's economic choices will define its long-term future. As a country, Canada needs to build, achieve energy independence, and stand on its own terms. Instead, it watches opportunities slip away while others advance and grow. Poilievre made clear that the fallout from this decision is only beginning and must change if Canada is to survive. Otherwise, Saskatchewan and Alberta might be lost and could become the 51st and 52nd American states.